There was a lot of talk, obviously, at all the media days, and I found a good website. I think it was Saturdays Down South that put together like what everyone said about NIL and revenue sharing, and there were quotes from Beth Getz and Jamie Pollard and all that. And Pollard says that football and men's basketball fund 90 to 95% of the Iowa State athletics department. And what I find really interesting and concerning is that you have some people up there, whether it's an administrator or a coach, they're looking at it as if the allotment, the $20 to $22 million allotment that the athletic department can spend on revenue sharing to athletes. You have some looking at it as, well, you have to pay the sports that fund the athletic department. So like in Pollard's case, if 90 to 95% of it is from men's basketball and football, then 90 to 95% of your revenue sharing should go to the football and men's basketball team. But it's not that simple, because then you have Ohio State athletic director Ross Bjork, who says he thinks that if it's $22 million, $11 million of that has to go to women's sports because of Title IX.
It's the courts will eventually decide it, but the question is Title IX, do you have to split the money or do you have to split the opportunity?
And what's the difference in your mind?
The difference is
scholarships as opposed to revenue?
Correct. So if you just make it an even number, this is really low, but if you have 100 men's scholarships, you have to have 100 women's scholarships. And some believe that if you're paying $11 million to the men, you have to pay $11 million to the women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, from what I understand, they're going to leave this basically up to the schools and the conferences, and then they're going to get sued no matter what they do. Like everything that came out from Friday, it was so disheartening to me, Chris. And when we were together, I wasn't reading any of this stuff. I didn't really start to work on this until yesterday. It's just, I feel like everything that happened on Friday is just a bunch of lawyers getting together and saying, how can we get more billable hours on the docket? Like, let me really simplify something for you guys. And this is, so did you see all the scholarship numbers that are going up across these sports? So like wrestling is a great case study here in the state of Iowa. It's been, I think, 9 or 10 wrestling scholarships for forever. Now they can have 30. Well, I had a lot of wrestling people texting me on Friday like, oh, well, this is great news. No, it's not. And I'll tell you why. Because they don't have to max out that 30. They're not going to. They're not going to. So what you're going to see, so like I think Ohio State has like 35 varsity sports. Iowa State has like 16. So there's a huge difference in a lot of these. The irony of all this is that the Olympics are going on right now. And you're going to see all these NCAA people, they have like this hashtag, like Olympians are made here. Well, they have been in the past because the football and the basketball programs have been funding it all, for these track athletes to have training tables and, all this great stuff.
And you're traveling all over the country to compete.
Correct.
Against the best programs.
What's going to happen now is, like, even Ohio State, the richest of the rich, they cannot afford to pay the $22 million and to max out all these scholarships. They just can't. So what they're going to do is they're going to like tier their athletic programs. There's going to be tier 1, which is going to be football, men's basketball. Tier 2 will be women's basketball, maybe volleyball, whatever. And then these tier 3s, they're going to disperse like one scholarship amongst like 20 athletes. It's going to be like D3 where they have like grants for these people. What you're going to see from this is the death of Olympic sports as we know it in the United States of America. Like, I think, like, Iowa State's a great example. Like, I don't know, like, financially how Iowa State can do what they've been doing. Like, I don't have any inside information here. Just want to let you know. Let's say, like, men's cross country, right? Non-revenue. Like, you're probably going to have, like, one scholarship to go amongst the whole team, and then you're going to take those scholarships and put them more towards football because their cap just went from 85 to 105.
But again, how do you spread that around to make it equal for women?
So
will the men's Olympic sports suffer way more than the women's Olympic sports because you have to even it out with all the football scholarships?
Let's say Iowa, 105 scholarships is now the max. Okay,
for football.
And Iowa, I would guess, is in a point where they're going to want to max out the 105 football scholarships just to keep up with everybody else. Mm-hmm. I don't know about Iowa State. There's not as much keeping up to do, right? Like, if you're Iowa State, are you trying to keep up with Georgia?
You shouldn't.
I don't know. No, you shouldn't. It's a different world now.
You should only be really focused on your conference.
Let's say Iowa goes from 85 to 105 football scholarships. They will then have to add 20 female scholarships across the athletic department, unless they cut men's scholarships somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I would guess women's wrestling at Iowa is about to see a boost in scholarships. I would guess that would be something that they would focus on. But again, there's only so much money, and these scholarships aren't just free. Like, they're paid for. The athletic departments write checks to the universities for these scholarships and the room and board and all that stuff. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, with these scholarships, they just grow on trees. No, there's physical money being paid. I think that there's a great irony going on right now with the Olympics happening, because I think we're going to look back in 10, 20 years, and the United States will not be in nearly as good of a spot, because you have people, you got to realize these people from all over the world, they come to these universities for the great Olympic sports. Like, oh, I'm an equestrian, I'm going to go to Oklahoma or whatever. Like, there's people from all over the world that want to come to college here so they can train. And I think they're going to greatly, greatly suffer because of this. This is a great move if you're the top 5% with anything in college athletics. Do not fall for them saying, well, we are offering 20 more scholarships for the women's rowing team. They're not going to max any of that out. They're probably going to take away from it so they can put more into football and the basketball programs. You just watch. And this is all a fraud. This is all a fraud, so they can go to Congress and be like, look at all these opportunities we're giving to young people.
And Jamie Pollard has said publicly some of the things that you just did, and as it pertains to Olympic sports, that he believes if it keeps going the way this is going, that you mentioned the men's cross country team. You're no longer going to be competing with the Texases. You're no longer going to be taking trips out to California or Florida. You are now likely going to be in the same boat with, Drake.
Yeah, Iowa State will be running cross country with like Co-College and Central College in the next 5 years. The other thing is, too, I think there's realistic where a lot of these Olympic sports will drop down a level because they can get actual scholarships at D2 where they're just not going to be available for a lot of these D1 programs. I think you'll see them like, yeah, we're going to go and I have a better deal for me and better training at Northwest Missouri State or, like some of these FCS type schools because they're not going to opt into this paying thing, and they're going to have real scholarships to give these people. And if I'm wrong, listen, I admit.
Well, you hope that you're going to be wrong, but
I admit I don't know all this stuff, and this is not an easy fix. All I know is everything I've read and texted with people about yesterday. I can't find many people who think that this is all like a good thing. This is all to keep us out of the courts, even though it's probably not going to do that either. The only way this stays out of the courts, Chris, is if there's like some unionization and collective bargaining that happens in college athletics. And to then I would say, well, does a USC quarterback, is that in the same scenario as Iowa State's backup left tackle? No, it's just vastly different. How are you going to collectively bargain for these thousands upon thousands of kids from all over the country in all different ways of life? I don't know what the answer is, but I think this is a terrible one. And if you're an Iowa fan, I think this is bad for you too, because I think that probably what's going to happen in that top end, Chris, is if we're going to be limiting transfers, right, and Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State are now maxing out at 105, they're still going to be able to pay and get the kids, right? Like, that's a lot of players who would be trickling down to Iowa and Northwestern and Wisconsin, right? Like, I think there's going to be a lot of hoarding of talent going on at the top end. And Iowa's probably tier 2, maybe tier 3 when it comes to that. So you're not going to get it as bad as Iowa State will. But when you look at who you're trying to compete with, man, like, it just got tougher because you're middle of the pack in that league. Like, and man, if I'm Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State today, I love this. But if I'm anybody else, like, this is, to me, this is one of the worst things to happen for parity in college football, maybe ever. I hope I'm wrong.
What, the scholarship limits being extended?
Yeah.
Specifically?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk the money and the revenue sharing and the allocation of that. It sounds like it's going to be $22 million that you can max out at for your athletic department. You take $22 million and you spread it out among the players. I can't imagine how they would do this half and half to women's athletics. It just doesn't make any sense because
that seems like an athletic director who's going on the record
football
with something he knows isn't true, so he can say, "Look, I said that."
So, I think all of your big boys are easily going to get to that $22 million and spend that.
Yes.
My questions are: How many programs will not spend that? And how will the money be allocated? Is it only going to go to football and basketball? Or, like, if you've got, let's just say at Iowa, you got this Spencer Lee. Does some of it go to him? I mean, can you pick and choose where this money goes? Does it have to be football and basketball?
I'm curious if, like, Iowa and Iowa State wrestling both won't opt out of their scholarships and have, like, a wrestling collective that pays these guys their room and board and all. I don't know. I just, because if not, I just don't know how they can do it all. You know what I mean? Like, I just wonder. I don't have an answer to that, but let's
go to my first question then.
Okay.
How ready are athletic departments? I'm not talking Ohio State, Georgia, Texas. Let's talk Iowa State, and other programs kind of on that same line. And Iowa's a little bit above Iowa State because they're getting so much more money from the Big Ten, and the gap is going to widen because of that.
Yes.
Are those programs ready to give $22 million to athletes in year one and then continue year after year?
And that number is going to grow
after year.
Did you know that too? That number is going to get bigger every year for 10 years. The $22 million. So it's going to be probably closer to 30 by the end of the 10 years.
Because I can see, like, if it's just a one-time thing, yeah, let's get this money together, boom. But then you got to come right back and raise that money again. And yeah,
it's just
they're making a lot of money off of these TV contracts.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that the Big Ten and the SEC, all the money that they bring in, it's the exact same number, $22 million, as it is in the Big 12, where they're not making nearly as much.
Yeah. No, and to answer your question, I don't directly know about Iowa. I know Iowa State's not ready to just fund $22 million worth. I would guess Iowa does, but they have a pretty big debt problem over there too, from what I understand. But still, I think they'll be good to go. What'll be fascinating again is how these, again, what I'm hearing, they're going to, like, tier these programs. So there's going to be certain programs at Iowa that have always had 10 scholarships, and now they're going to have 1. And they're going to, you've got to cut costs. You've got to. And if everybody else if you have to add 20 football scholarships, you got to get rid of 20 scholarships somewhere else. Like, it's math. And it was so deceiving what they put out on Friday. It was so deceiving. If you just would have read that, you'd be like, oh, this is great. All these more opportunities for young people, when in the reality, that's the ironic thing to me about this. A lot of these politicians, they're fighting against the corporate suits to give experiences to young people. That's what they tell us. When in reality, I think they're going to end up taking away from a lot more young people than they are actually being additive. But then the other side of that argument, and I can argue both, is that football has funded this whole thing for 50 years.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's about time those guys get paid what they're worth. You could make that argument too. It's a very complex issue. I hate this clearinghouse thing. Have you read into this clearinghouse that they're going to run NIL through?
How is that going to work?
I think this is one of the stupidest ideas I've ever heard in my entire life.
So give us a Reader's Digest version of what the clearinghouse actually is.
The idea is a good one. Like, I like how this starts because they want to make sure that some car dealership isn't paying a quarterback $10 million to show up and do 5 minutes of work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's great. Like, I love this. From what I understand, is they want to have like a third-party arbitrator type situation, which I'm guessing this becomes like what compliance people are right now for the NCAA, but I don't know. I'm just guessing. That any NIL deal that again, these are all in-house now, right? So they're not running through like Bloom and Brad and those types of guys. Any NIL deal. So let's say Fareway wants to pay an Iowa football player $1,000 to come and do a TV ad. It's got to be approved by this third-party clearinghouse before they can do it. And then it has to be reviewed by like these. But my whole deal is like, man, like what we're doing here in this state is just vastly different than, like, again, USC is the perfect example. Like it's like trying to compare what Iowa's doing to Phil Knight in Oregon. Like, it's apples and oranges here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think two things will come from this. One, this is going to be completely overwhelming, and then we're just going to be right back into where we were with the NCAA and compliance. This is an impossible task for these people to run through. But two, the one good thing that has come from this last 3 years is these players being out in the community and like making real differences. And those days are done. Because I can promise you, when this thing is run by these bigger, more national corporate entities, they're not going to be like, hey, let's get this player $1,000 to go to this American Heart Association deal to take pictures with little kids who are dying. Like, they're not going to do that anymore because it's not local anymore. And I think there'll be local people, like and like good people who we like and trust and all that, but they're going to have, they're going to be answering to a publicly traded company, not like Bloom has to answer to his board of 5 people who he knows and gets to see every day, right? Like, I think any of the positive that we've had from this is going to go away. And maybe it should. Like, maybe selling beer and these companies giving $1 for, maybe that's not a good way to do it either. And I'm not saying it is. But like, Chris, like the value of $1,000 in Los Angeles could not be more different than the value of $1,000 in Ames, Iowa. And we're going to judge all these things on the same playing field. What are we doing?
Yeah. And I also, like you mentioned in there that this isn't going to be going through Bloom. It's going through the athletic department. I just don't see a way where the outside collectives don't remain. Like, maybe Bloom goes inside the athletic department, but I think something else is going to pop up outside.
So,
because the $22 million is not going to be enough.
Well, but what they're saying is this stupid clearinghouse is not only to police that, but also the collectives. So, like, if Bloom still ran We Will, and he got a $10,000 deal for Rocco Becht with Fareway, then that would have to go through this clearinghouse, and it would count against the $22 million as well, is what they're saying.
So the $22 million That's not gonna. It's not gonna work because
unless these kids
you're gonna
opt
have an
out.
athletic department that's gonna have players that are combined to be worth way more than $22 million.
I've used Audie Crooks as an example. Like, if I were her and her people, I would strongly look at this new model and ask myself if I should opt out and just get my own NIL deals.
Yeah, because let's just say, and these aren't the numbers. Audie Crooks is worth $10 million. Rocco Becht is worth $15 million. Right? That's two players and then nobody else gets paid. Like, I know those numbers are outrageous. I'm just saying you got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of players, student athletes, in this pot. There are going to be you could probably, at a school like, I don't know, Texas, Ohio State, you could pick 10 players that might be able to equal $22 million. So then what? So they don't get paid what they're worth because it has to be spread around the
Correct.
whole thing? It doesn't make any sense. So I think
These
outside
people,
collectives are going to have to remain, and they're
These
not going
people-
to have to answer to this $22 million.
this is what got the NCAA into problems in the first place, because it refused to rescind any control over these players. Had they just given more 20 years ago, they'd be in a much better spot right now.
Yeah.
You know, and
Well,
now
we
they're
totally
just,
screwed that up.
yeah.
They
Now there's
totally
like
screwed it up.
now there's not just a gun to their head. They're literally holding on to a ticking grenade.
And we're trying to play catch up, and reading the quotes from these athletic directors, these conference commissioners from media days. I mean, they're like scared to death. They don't know what to do.
And these are
They're like,
smart people.
I-
They're not idiots. You know.
Well, if we do it this way, then I'm worried we're going to get sued.
Well,
And
it's-
this is all coming, it sounds like, by next football season.
It is.
This revenue
So these schools are these football and men's basketball programs. I'm sure women's basketball too is feeling it. They're already being asked by recruits, "What are we going to get paid?" And they don't know what to say because because this is so late. You know.
Billy Napier, the head coach at Florida, who might not be there next year, he was asked about revenue sharing, and he says that at Florida, he thinks that if it's $20 million allotted in revenue sharing, that football should get and will get 70 to 75% of that revenue, so 12.5 to 15 million. But
I think he's right.
it's going to be so, like, for let's say Creighton.
No, I know. What?
It's apples and oranges there too, because Creighton
Buy
doesn't have
stock in
football.
Big East basketball right now.
Yeah,
I hope
they
you
can
bought your
use
stock already.
all of it on basketball.
What is like UConn going to do? Have you thought about that?
Yeah,
Like, why would you even give your football team anything? Just punt and say we suck.
Yeah.
Give it all to men's and women's basketball.
it's just
Like,
It's
you know
sad
who
that
I'd
we're
worry
here.
about? Like, I worry about both of our women's programs. Like, Iowa's this like ascending program. You had this transcendent star. Finley's had Iowa State rolling. You have great attendance. What if they can't put as many resources into women's basketball as people are doing throughout the country? We care about that here. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, they're sold out crowds.
Well,
I'll tell you our number.
I think Iowa's given more money to women's basketball in the collective than men's basketball.
Yeah, and will that keep up under the school? Like, I don't know. I don't know.